continuing the discussion of Orthodoxy and Orthopraxy, Siddhanta, Sad-Siddhanta, proper understanding, and Sadacha, proper behavior. Of course, some people would become upset by such terms, proper understanding, proper behavior, with the idea that whatever anyone does or thinks, we shouldn't judge them. We should just take everyone to be a unique individual who's divinely inspired in whatever he's doing. But this idea that we shouldn't judge anyone, well, if we say we shouldn't judge anyone, that's immediately judging those who judge. There's something wrong. If you say you shouldn't judge, that means you say that you're judging those who judge others as being wrong. So, you're caught in a trap there. So, we can't avoid it. We have to make distinctions. The Mayavadis, they want to say there's no distinction. It's all the same. But there are distinctions. They can't avoid that there are distinctions in this world, but they say that, well, that's just illusion. But in reality, there's no distinction. So what is the proper understanding? Our acharyas have very much emphasized that in the matter of proper understanding, the most important factor is to understand and reject Mayavad, the idea that everything is all one and the same. Because in this Mayavad, the idea, nirvishesh, knows no specialty, there's no particular characteristic of anything. To see differences is an illusion. Because that destroys this Mayavad, destroys Savior Sevak Bhav, the relationship or the feelings between the servant and the object of service, which is the essence of bhakti. We say, Jiveswarupai Krishna, we say it's a fact. That's a categorical fact. But the implication of it, it's not just some formula like E equals mc squared, which is supposed to deal with matter, that which is insentient, but in the relationship between the servant and the served, that's the point, the relationship, the feelings. So there are other kinds of Mayavad influenced people who emphasize the feelings. They emphasize feelings, but not the proper understanding, the gradation, the position, who is who, and where do we all stand, as Maranidhar Prabhu was emphasizing this morning in his lecture. Where are we? Of course, that's in terms of what we heard this morning. Grandfather Bhishma Dev was speaking in terms of our materialistic situation as in the Varnashram system, the Dana Dharma, Raja Dharma. What was the next one? No, that was in the third line, wasn't it? Sri Dharma, Bhagavat Dharma, Moksha Dharma. So these all were being emphasized. Moksha Dharma Vibhagaja, Sri Dharman, Bhagavat Dharman. Samasa Vyasa Yogataha. So that's all in terms of our material position. There's gradation in material positions. And that gradation continues in the spiritual condition. But the gradation is the difference is there for exchange of service and acceptance of service and the feeling that is generated, the feelings of love that are generated. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught, Prema Pumarto Mahan, to attainment of prema, that is the real purpose, the highest purpose. But that prema, Krishna prema, is on the basis of understanding who we are in relationship to Krishna. Artificially, it cannot be there. If we don't clearly understand that we are meant to be the servant of Krishna, and ultimately, as one becomes so much absorbed in service to Krishna, then at that stage the feelings become so prominent that the philosophical understanding is not necessary. For the gopis of Vrindavan, the philosophical understanding is not only not necessary, but it actually becomes an obstacle at that stage to their exalted feelings of love for Krishna. But that stage is not to be imitated. If we try to emphasize feelings without understanding in our present stage, then we fall down due to lack of spiritual strength. Adhikana labhya siddha deha bhave viparja buddhi janme shaktir abhave. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that. In our immature stage, if we try to meditate on our siddha deha, our perfect realized form, without attaining the eligibility to do so, then we will get an opposite, our consciousness will develop in a contradictory way due to lack of spiritual strength. So, all these points should be discussed. We come here for a festival. We think festival is singing and dancing and being happy, but it's also some understanding is required. It's actually very, in one sense, very simple philosophy, but very, very heavy in the sense that it's very meaningful. It affects our whole life. If we have singing and dancing without this understanding, then the meaning of that singing and dancing, then we may not be able to enter very deeply into that. O Krishna, O energy of Krishna, please engage me in your service. What are the ramifications of that? Who is Krishna? What is the meaning of that service? So all these points should be discussed. So this verse, or these two verses I was discussing, Samohang sarva bhuteshu name dveshu stina priyaha ye bhajanti tu mang bhakta maite teshu chapyaham. Krishna says, I am envious to no one, everyone, nor do I particularly favor anyone. But I do favor I like my devotees more. The apparent contradiction in that. To the extent that apichet sudaracharo bhajate mam ananyabhak sadhureva samantavya samyak vyavasito hisa. That a devotee who is not properly situated in proper behavior, even he is to be considered a devotee if he is fixed in his determination to serve Krishna. So, on one hand, everyone is seen equally. There's a major point of Bhagavad Gita. There's one of the first verses everyone learns when we're learning Bhagavad Gita verses. If we don't learn systematically chapter by chapter, but otherwise most of us, we join, if we join a Gurukul at the age of 7 or something, then we may learn chapter by chapter. Otherwise we learn for preaching and for our own understanding. Then one of the first verses we learn is Vidya vinaya sampanne brahmane gavihastini shuni chaiva shvapakecha pandita samadarshinaha. That a learned person is one who sees with equal vision. A gentle and learned brahmana, Vidya vinaya brahmane, then a cow, an elephant, dog, a dog eater. You see them all with equal vision. So there's equal vision in the sense that everyone is ultimately a spiritual living being. But there's also differentiation in terms of our present material situation. So we see the crocodile is the spirit animating the body of the crocodile is ultimately a servant of Krishna. And the same has the same potential as a great Paramahamsa Vaishnava. But we bow down to the Paramahamsa Vaishnava and we don't intimately associate with crocodiles or people like crocodiles. That we should people like crocodiles means the crocodile lies in the water looking innocuous, like a log, harmless, but then suddenly snaps you up. So there are many examples in Shastra. The person who's like a heron, he stands at the edge of the water, just looking in the water, meditating, looking like a great yogi. But then when he sees a fish, he'll take it. So someone may look like a great, or the cat. The cat also became a yogi and had all the mice as his disciples. But gradually he lost all his disciples and became fatter and fatter. He fooled them that he was a great yogi. So we have to differentiate, have good discrimination. The mice, they were too innocent. The cat was getting too old and he couldn't catch the mice. So then he just became a yogi and started meditating and told the mice that now I'm old, I'm taking sannyas and I'm going to do a vow of non-violence and fasting. And all the mice were very innocent. They thought, oh, he's reformed. He's become a great yogi. But whenever he got the opportunity, one would come to him because they trusted him. So they would come to him sometimes alone and they wouldn't go back. They turned into cat stool. So they were too trusting. They didn't differentiate. They didn't have enough intelligence to differentiate. And these stories, there are so many. This is from Mahabharata, the cat, the heron, what was that? Which creature was that? Which creature was that? Even the jackals wouldn't eat his body. Was that the vulture? He betrayed. I don't know, there's so many, I just can't remember just now who betrayed. Yeah, so even the jackal. There are so many stories in Mahabharata and Hitopadesh which give us some practical intelligence how to differentiate and live in this world, which are also very useful not only for living in this world and dealing with people like crocodiles and herons and ourselves, we also shouldn't be crocodiles and herons, but also spiritually, because if we get a guru who's like a cat, who's gobbling us up, then, we're not going to make much spiritual advancement. So, discrimination. Bhagavad Gita teaches us also, discriminate. First thing, discriminate between spirit and matter. Make that, at the one hand, we see equally the cow, the dog, the brahmana, the cow, the dog. On the other hand, we have to discriminate between, and in devotional life, that's the, in surrender, that's the first principle. Anukulyena. Anukulyena sankalpa pratikulyena varjita. We have to discriminate between that which is favorable for our spiritual advancement and that which is, and resolve to follow that, and that which is blocking our spiritual advancement, we should reject that. So that we have to apply this in all fields. What is our association? What is our occupation? What is our lifestyle? How do we live our daily life? In every aspect of life, this is discrimination is to be applied. So when it's said that this samatha, samatvam yoga uchyate, yoga means to be equipoised in heat and cold, happiness and distress, sickness and health, gain and loss, and so on. But at the same time, we have to discriminate between what is proper and what is improper. In fact, this, if you can read also this 11th canto of Bhagavatam, where Krishna talks about that which is favorable, that which is unfavorable, on the material platform, and then ultimately he says, but even this discrimination, if there's too much discrimination between right and wrong, if you're too much concerned with what is pure and impure, that's also an impediment to spiritual advancement. And then Uddhava, who he's speaking to, asks that, well, you gave the scriptures, and the scriptures are full of all this stuff about what's good and what's bad, so what's the proper understanding of all this? So, and then Krishna gives that verse which comes out in Bengali in Chaitanya Charitamrita as this Dvaite bhadra bhadra gyan e shabram e bhalo e manda shab monodharma. So in this world of duality, to consider what is auspicious and what is inauspicious, what is good and what is bad, is all on the mental platform. If we're thinking in terms of material advancement doesn't mean just getting more and more money and more buildings, but in the Vedic concept that would mean going to the heavenly planets, getting a better birth in future. So all these things considered on the material platform, it doesn't really take us anywhere. It takes us round and round in circles. That's all. Gata gatam kama kama labhanda. You go up to the heavenly planets, you come back down again. So again, we come to Siddhanta. What is the proper understanding of all the scriptures? That we're meant for surrendering to Krishna. And whatever is favorable for that, we accept. Whatever is unfavorable, we reject. Which means that we may accept some things which are rejected in the Vedic, in the Karma Kanda prescriptions, and we may reject something which is recommended. For instance, according to Shastra, no one is supposed, if a member of the Varnashram system crosses over the ocean, then he's rejected from the Varnashram system. He loses his purity. But on the other hand, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Priti vite ache joto nagaradi gram sabatra pracha hoibe mora nam, that Krishna consciousness should be preached all over the world. And he especially wanted Indians to do that. Bharata bhumite hoila manusha janmaja janma shata kori koro para upaka. That Indians especially are meant for, Indian means who has got a human birth in India, they should make their life perfect and act for the welfare of others. So there are different prescriptions, and what is relevant in one circumstance might not be relevant in another, which is another reason why we need gurus, because we may be confused with there may be so many different prescriptions and proscriptions, do's and don'ts, and what to do in a particular circumstance. We may be confused, not only about the details, but even about what we're actually supposed to be doing in our life, as was exemplified in the case of one Brahmana in East Bengal called Tapan Mishra, who read many books. He wanted to find out, well, what's the goal of life and how do we attain it? Okay, let's look in Shastra. It must be in Shastra. He looked in Shastra and he got confused. And then, by good fortune, Nimai Pandit, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, before he accepted sannyas, came in that area. And Tapan Mishra was directed in a dream, go and see him. He was called, that word was given, boipoka, bookworm. He was a bookworm. He was always looking in books. Do you say that in your language? Bookworm? He had his nose in the book all the time. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu just gave him the very simple answer. Shadha Shadana Tatta Jaikichu Shakal Harinama Sankirtane Milebe Shakal. Everything that's been known about sadhana, or sadhya, the goal of life, and sadhana, the means to attain it, it all coalesces in Harinam Sankirtan. So, simple answer. So, why is that? Then how are we going to say, how should we establish this? Haridas Thakur, yeah. He was a practitioner of the holy name and a teacher of the holy name. And he was chanting, but he also, people were challenged. Why do you say, what is this? Holy name. So, why do you say holy name gives mukti? And Haridas Thakur gives mukti, yeah, it gives mukti, but who cares about mukti anyway? What's the big thing about mukti? Yeah, but this Gopal Chakravarti, he became upset. People are there, they're working hard for many, many lifetimes to get mukti, and you just say it's something insignificant which comes merely as a byproduct of chanting the holy name, which even a baby can do. A baby can do, but you can't do it. Because you're envious. So, Haridas Thakur was able to uphold that position by quoting so many shastras. So this discrimination is required. Discrimination on the basis of shastra. Now we can't read all the shastras and understand all the shastras. We don't have time, we don't have the intelligence, we don't have the inclination, we don't have even all the shastras, even if we wanted to, because so many of them are not extant in the world today. So that was the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, when the rishis at Naimisharanya, they asked that, well, there are so many shastras, but we don't have, in Kali Yuga, we don't have time, we don't have the intelligence, people in general, the Prayanal Paisho Sabya Kalavas Min Yuga Janaha Manda Sumanda Matyo Manda Bhagya Yupadruta. People they're short-lived, they're stupid, and they're unlucky, and their mind is always disturbed. And how can there be any good fortune in this Kali Yuga? So okay, Sutta Goswami, you studied all the shastras, so you just tell us what's the best. And they already knew the answer because they were eager to hear about Krishna, but they wanted to hear that. And so the answer there is there, Srimad Bhagavatam. Purana Okadanot, what is that? Krishna Swadhamo Bhagate Dharma Jnana Divisaha Kalo Nashta Dirshamesha Purana Kodunoditaha. In Krishna left, Krishna who is always accompanied by dharma, by jnana, spiritual knowledge. He left. And as soon as he left, the very moment he left, Kali, the personality of Kali entered. Now it's my yoga, Kali Yoga. He entered. It means he entered the hearts of everyone. But persons in this Kali Yuga, they can get light from this sunlike Bhagavat Purana. So this understanding, discrimination, knowing what to do, not what to, we get all the answers from the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the Sarvaveti Itihasanam Saram Sarami Hi Udahritam. It's the extracted essence of the essence of all the Vedic literatures. But even that has to be understood from the Vaishnavas. So therefore we're enjoying. Jao Bhagavata Paro Vaishnavastana. We have to understand from the Vaishnavas to get the clear vision, clear understanding. And we have to keep on absorbing that proper understanding. Hear it again. We say, well, I did my Bhakti Shastri. I already did it 15 years ago, so I already know everything. But we have to hear it again and again. We may be surprised to hear Srila Prabhupada again and again saying what seems to be very basic things. I myself was surprised, and the last time I had physical darshan of Srila Prabhupada in October 1977, preaching to all his big men around him, big leaders, and talking about how we have to control the senses. I was surprised. Here's Srila Prabhupada in Vrindavan with all these big leaders around him after so many years of preaching, and he's talking about how we have to control the senses. We need to hear that. As long as we haven't controlled this. And if we think we have controlled the sense, we better just check to make sure. Just like, I don't know about now, but it used to be, before you go on a journey, especially in hot weather, in India or somewhere, you better check you have water in your radiator. Otherwise, every journey, you have to check. You may say, well, I checked so many times, there's no problem. And people say, you don't have to put a seatbelt. I drove so many times, there's no problem. I never had an accident. Well, you don't know. There are accidents even on the royal roads, as Srila Prabhupada wrote. So, we have proper discrimination. What is the right path? What is the right association? What is the right food? The Buddhists, they emphasize this a lot. The right action. But of course, because they have the wrong siddhanta, everything they say is right, is actually wrong. Even though it may seem very good, but because they got the wrong idea, then everything they do is wrong. I mean, you may think, well, it's very good, ahimsa, and they believe in reincarnation, but at the outset, they reject that there's any Atma. So if there's no Atma, then where's the question of any love of God? So it's the whole thing. Even though it may look very good, very peaceful and calm and controlled, but it's all wrong, beginning to end, back to front, top to bottom, inside out. It's all hellish, because there's no personality. So a proper understanding is the basis of continued proper action. Proper action is on the basis of proper understanding. Which is why Srila Prabhupada also was always encouraging chanting, chant, dance and be happy, but he was continually speaking in such a way to establish how we can clearly understand who we are and why we should act in Krishna consciousness. Why we should perform these activities. So, now I criticize some Buddhists and I think, well, what is this? Buddhists, they're nice people. So, but, yeah, we should see good in others and we shouldn't look for the wrong in others just for looking for that. But we should also understand what is right and what is wrong. And again, we shouldn't just think, well, because someone's with us, they're right, and if someone's not with us, if they're not with us, they're wrong. That must be. If they haven't come to this point of Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam, then they're missing. They're not on the right path. They may have some good things, but not properly on the right path. And it's not just just because someone walks in the door of ISKCON and has a tilak on and says Hari Bol, that they are properly situated. We have to see this according to the teachings of Shastra and the Acharyas, and to hone our intelligence by constant hone means to, you know what that word means? Yeah. Means to by constant application of our mind to these principles and understanding. That's why there may be highly ecstatic devotees, such as Vangshidas Babaji Maharaj, Gorki Shodas Babaji Maharaj. They're highly ecstatic, but they neither did they take disciples. Gorki Shodas Babaji Maharaj had at least one, and others also counted themselves as his disciples, but they weren't preachers or acharyas in the classic sense of the term. They can inspire by their example, but they don't teach. Srila Prabhupada said about Gorki Shodas Babaji Maharaj, he saw the condition of the people and he was just disgusted and just kept himself aloof. So we can hear about such devotees, and we can be inspired how they were Sakshad Vairagya Murti, Vipralamba Rasambodhe. How Gorki Shodas Babaji Maharaj, he is the very form of, the very embodiment of detachment from this world, and the ocean of Vipralamba Rasa, this ecstatic feelings of separation from Krishna. So we can be inspired by that. But it's not possible for us to follow that example. We can't artificially follow that way of life. So Acharya means one who teaches by example. And Srila Prabhupada often gave that understanding that even someone is the topmost devotee, but he acts on the Madhyamadikari platform. He interacts with disciples to show them how to practice devotional service. Just like a teacher writes on the board A, B, C. He doesn't need to do it for himself, but he does that to show the students, the children, how to learn that, so they can also gradually go on to read and write, and in this way have access to so many branches of knowledge. So simply inspiration is not enough. Often we hear that, at least devotees say to me, "Oh, you please come and give us some inspiration." Yeah, inspiration, good, that's good. Come to this festival, get some inspiration. But along with inspiration, then systematic education is also required. Otherwise, we may feel inspired about Krishna consciousness, but if we don't really know what it is and why and how we're supposed to be doing it, then we won't become free from the misconceptions that stultify our advancement, that hold us back. Various misconceptions. They all various misconceptions take various forms which impede our Savior Sevak Bhav, the feelings which come from fully surrendering ourselves as a servant to He who is the only one who is worthy of accepting us, who is the proper one to accept our service, namely Krishna. So education is required also. We may be inspired to chant Hare Krishna by some festival, but then we don't maintain it. We may not maintain it at the same level. We have to get constant inspiration and guidance by systematic education, understanding what are the principles of Krishna consciousness. So, as we see in our movement at the present time, there can be a tension in preaching between, and in practice, between correctness, philosophical correctness, and correctness in action in devotional service, what we should do, what we should not do, and extending Krishna consciousness to others, being liberal in extending Krishna consciousness to others. Mahatma Prabhu this morning gave a talk. I actually asked him to give that on the being a strict practitioner of Krishna consciousness and a liberal distributor of Krishna consciousness. So there can be some kind of tension between that, because if one wants to practice very strictly, but one is also trying to extend oneself and offer Krishna consciousness to others, there may be a fear that if we practice very rigidly, they may be turned off by that. They may think, oh, it's too difficult for me. I can't do this. So we may try to make it more easy for them. But if we make it more easy for them, and we make it more easy for ourselves, then everything becomes lax. So there's a tension between those two things, between the strictness or the concentration and the focus that's required. Tivrena bhakti yogena yajeta purusham param. The intensity that's required in Krishna consciousness. There's a tension between that intensity that is required to become fully absorbed in Krishna and become free from material illusion. There's a tension between that and trying to extend Krishna consciousness to persons who are a long way from Krishna consciousness and who maybe feel intimidated by such rigidity of practice, and who don't understand why it should be done, so they're not inclined to do it. In the early days of this movement, there was in New York City, Srila Prabhupada started the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, founded it there. And then he went to San Francisco on the west coast of America. And there was a different mood in New York and in San Francisco. In New York, the devotees tended to be more strict, more philosophical. And in San Francisco, the hippie land, and the idea was just let everyone come and chant Hare Krishna, because there were so many hippies there, and they loved to chant and dance and take prasadam, but they weren't. Not so many hippies were inclined to give up free sex and drugs, and the whole ethos of hippiedom was a rebellion against a structured lifestyle. So even the devotees, those who became more serious and took initiation from Srila Prabhupada, even they were not so they had a freewheeling spirit, and they weren't. Of course, this is a generalization, but it's valid from what I understand. I wasn't there at the time. There was a spirit. Just give Krishna consciousness. Don't worry too much about so many rules. They're just people come and chant with us and dance and take prasadam, and even there were initiated devotees who around just close to the temple, storefront temple, there was a donut shop which devotees were fond of frequenting, even though Srila Prabhupada told them again and again and again. The devotees, they didn't even take the order of their guru very seriously, whereas in New York, headed by Brahmananda, who from the very beginning took Srila Prabhupada very seriously, and he was clearly the leader in New York, and he set this mood that we just have to do what Prabhupada says, and they accepted Srila Prabhupada really as their guru, whereas in San Francisco, and again I'm generalizing, it was more like Prabhupada was this far out old man, like some wizard, came from this Gandalf or something like that, came, and he's like some wizard, and he's old, but he jumps and he dances and he smiles and he relates to us, and he tells us all these far out stories from India. It was a different mood altogether. So the New York approach was more philosophical. They'd read Prabhupada's books, more serious, more restrictive. In San Francisco also, the boys and girls, it was all hippie, they're all mixed up, whereas in the beginning from New York, they were the mostly men joining, and they were not that much inclined toward the women, it seems. There was some story. Jadurani in the beginning, she would come and paint, and it wasn't known whether she would be accepted or she could be initiated at all. Whereas in the beginning, and from the very beginning in San Francisco, there was no question, men, women, everything together. She would come and paint in a mini skirt, initiate devotee. Nowadays you think that's normal, but even those days in the beginning, in 1966, 67, they could understand there's something wrong with this, and eventually Srila Prabhupada pointed out to her, well, that's not very proper to wear a miniskirt as an initiated devotee. So devotees in New York, they more of a monastic approach, whereas in San Francisco more of a sentimental, emotional, affective, encouraging. Of course, it's not that in New York they weren't encouraging, but non-judgmental. Yes, non-judgmental. And the San Francisco approach was very effective in bringing many, many people to devotional service at some level. And even to the present time, we find in the Bay Area around San Francisco, many people remember us from those days, and they're very favorable. They like it. They think of the Hare Krishna as something very good. So that approach was very good at bringing many people in, but maybe not as effective as when they were brought in to bring them up. You get the point? Bring them in, but we have to go up also. So that overall, that more restrictive approach, it gradually became more, of course I'm speaking in very general terms, it became more prominent in ISKCON, and Srila Prabhupada himself gradually introduced more and more rules. In the beginning, there was no morning program. There was no there was a morning program in New York 3 days a week starting at 7 o'clock. There was no Mangalarti. Prabhupada introduced that later. The Guru Puja, as far as I know, was introduced as late as 1974. Spontaneously, it seems, by Tamal Krishna Maharaj. It was done one day, and then Prabhupada said, okay, we'll do this every day. So gradually more and more rules and regulations were introduced, and some of the devotees from those early days, they thought, well, it was so nice in the early days. We were all living together, brother and sister, and everyone was nice and no one was heavy. Gradually they became more and more heavy. I know when I joined in 1975, it was generally considered sannyasi is really should be extremely heavy. That was the general model of a sannyasi. Someone who's really heavy, who tells you you're a fool and a rascal at least 3 times a minute, and that pervaded the whole movement. I know. When I first joined, I at every moment you do everything wrong because you don't know anything what to do. And every moment someone said, "They don't know that, that's wrong. You're a fool." So it was a heavy mood, but if you're going to accept it, you got trained pretty quickly and learn what was right and what was wrong. But it seems that heavy mood that also produced some discontent. There's maybe some egoism in it. One of the first 11 gurus who, after becoming a guru, after Srila Prabhupada passed away, had the opportunity to indulge in his childhood fantasies of being a rock star. And one of the songs he made on the album was "Guru, Guru on the wall, who is the heaviest of them all?" Making a parody of the... and it used to be like that. In Mayapur, the Mayapur festival, there were 11 Vyasasans surrounding Prabhupada's Vyasasans. There's hardly any space in the temple room after all of that. I mean, the temple room wasn't so big at that time. And it was like a competition. That the most prestigious guru the more prestigious ones would have the opportunity to give the Bhagavatam class on the days closest to Gaur Purnima. And it was almost like, who's going to give the heaviest class? That was... I mean, it wasn't stated, but it was understood. Who's going to knock them out the most with the heaviest class that everyone walks on? I remember one of the sannyasis saying that everyone's just interested in sex life. Even our devotees, people even take sannyas just to attract women. Really? That's a pretty heavy thing to say. Maybe it's true, but I hope not. But it certainly, it attracted some attention. Something unique to say. So that produced much discontent. Even one of our most heavy gurus, who's now passed away, after he passed away, then one center in which he was dominant, then he was overseeing in America. The devotees there told me that, or actually the temple president there told me, because he's a disciple of that guru, he became a temple president sometime after the passing away of that guru, and he wanted to tighten it up. It had become a bit loose after the passing away of the heavy guru. And all the devotees who are all his godbrothers and godsisters say, "No, we don't want to go back to that." And we say, "Well, that's what our guru. He kept it very tight, all rules and right." No, had enough of that. Even though it was given by their guru for their benefit, they thought, "Guru Dev passed." What a relief. They wouldn't say that directly, but indirectly by saying that, they'd say, "No, we don't want to go back to that." I mean, that's what they're saying. It's too much, we had enough of that. So, nowadays in our movement, we've come around, the heavy sannyasis and gurus, and I can just say a few experiences. Anyone from those old days can give you all kinds of wonderful stories of, one of our ISKCON gurus, someone wouldn't get up in the morning, so he threw him down the stairs in his sleeping bag. And then someone else in another center, I saw him, he wouldn't get up in the morning, so he dragged him in his sleeping bag and threw him in the cold shower. He still wouldn't get out of his sleeping bag. It was like the scissors are not, So, not like that nowadays, but it was a heavy mood. It's pretty difficult not to go to Mangalati. The devotees were very merciful in those days. But it provoked, so it swung the other way, and now we're all very compassionate and kind and non-judgmental, and you don't have to go to Mangalati, and you don't have to this, and you don't really have to do anything. It's true, you don't have to do anything. It's actually a fact. You don't have to do anything. You don't even have to chant 16 rounds, one round, you don't have to chant Hare Krishna. The only problem is that you stay in the material world, and you don't get love of Krishna. So, rules and regulations have a purpose. So the idea, well, let's just be nice to people. Well, okay, well, Mother Teresa was also nice, but she didn't take anyone back to Godhead. Although maybe some of our devotees think that she did, but personally I doubt it very much how a coward went back to Godhead. Anyway, I shouldn't talk too much about Mother Teresa, but apparently she was pretty strict also. She ran her poor sister, what's that, mothers of, what are they called? The sisters, can't remember, the Sisters of Charity, isn't it? Something like that. So she was dictatorial, so we're told. But anyway, just to be nice is, many dogs are nice. That's why people like to have dogs, isn't it? They wag their tail. They're happy to see you. They wag their tail, they lick you. But that's not going to help you spiritually. Being nice in and of itself is not very helpful. We have to know what is proper and what is improper and act accordingly. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was ecstatic, but he also took time out to instruct in the philosophy of, to preach or to debate the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, to present the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, and to instruct in the proper practice of Krishna consciousness. He commissioned Sanatana Goswami to write an extensive book explaining Bhakti Sadacha, the proper behavior in devotional service. I read something by one of these Western scholars who made this outrageous statement that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is not a philosopher. Oh, what an outrage! What's he talking about? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, yes, he chanted, he danced, but he gave so much philosophy also. I don't know. I didn't read more, but they may have so many theories. Well, later on, someone wrote a book and they ascribed all this philosophy to. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu chanted, he danced, he wept, he fell on the ground in ecstasy, but he also taught philosophy, and he was very strict in his personal practices. He was very, very strict. Especially in his interactions with women were almost nothing. There's some remarkable incident is given of how one specifically said Uriya woman, she climbed on his shoulder to have darshan of Jagannath, and Govinda, his servant, wanted to pull her down, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu chastised him and said, look, she's so enthusiastic to see Jagannath. But on another occasion, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was running to embrace that devotee who was beautifully singing songs of Krishna, Gita Govinda. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was so absorbed in ecstasy, he was running through the bed of thorn bushes and not even noticing that the thorns were cutting his body, and Govinda, his servant, ran after him and said, "It's a woman!" singing. And at the sound of the word woman, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu immediately came out of the ecstasy and said, Govinda, you saved my life. That would have been a disaster for Chaitanya. He saw that as a disaster. So he was very strict in his practice. Apane achare dharma shikhan najai. What is that? Apane na koile dharma shikhan najai. Unless one personally practices dharma, one cannot teach others. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he was ecstatic, but he also taught by his personal example and by teaching philosophy and proper practice. The 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, ecstatic. Hey Radhe Rajadevike Chalalite Hey Nanda Suna Kutaha Shri Govardhana Kalpa Pada Patale Kalindi Vanye Kutaha Ghoshantaviti Sarvato Rajapure Kedaya Mahavivalo Vande Rupa Sanatano Raghuyugo Srijiva Gopalako. 6 Goswamis, they were running in the land of Vrajamandal, in calling out Krishna, Radhe, Lalite, Hey Radhe, Vrajati. Where are you? On the calling out at the desire trees and the banks of the bottom of Govardhan and by the Yamuna, the forests by the side. They were calling out in transcendental distress, being bewildered by transcendental distress in separation from Krishna. But they were also Nana Shastra Vicharanaika Nipuno Saddharma Samstapaka Lokanam Hitakarino Tribhuvane Manyo Sharanyaka. They were engaged in deep Shastric study for the purpose of benefiting others. So they wanted to show what is the right understanding. Especially Jiva Goswami did that in great detail, Rupa Goswami. And then introducing Bhakti Ras, Rupa Goswami's contribution. One devotee here who doesn't like or shy to be announced has made a study how Rupa Goswami has his contribution, how he is, of course that's known, but in detail, some analysis, how he is this rasa from dramatics, he has applied that to bhakti, which is actually the original. So the contributions of the Goswami, great scholastic contributions, which give the basis to the philosophical basis to the Gauriya Sampradaya. Without that, simply being ecstatic and having good feelings, then we get the Al-Baul, Kartabhaja, what is it, Nera Neri, Jat Gosai, and so on. Saki Beki, Churadari, Goranga Nagari, and so on. The 13 Tota Babaji has listed. 13 opera sampradaya, because they don't have the proper basis in understanding. Hey, one way neither of us got in that is Sahajya. that Bhaktistan Saraswati Thakur grouped them all under Sahajya, Prakrita Sahajya. So what about statements then, well, you bathe in Radha Kund and you'll get prem, following in the footsteps of the assistants of Radharani. Here Chaitanya Leela, and you'll get prem. So those statements are true, but that doesn't negate everything else that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught. It doesn't mean that, well, you don't have to bother chanting 16 rounds. You just go and bathe in Radha Kund and then you can do whatever you like because you're going to get Radha Prem. Or maybe you'll But that such benedictions are available doesn't negate all else that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave. By hearing about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes, we should get the inspiration to follow Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings, by which Ado Shadha Tata Sadhu Sangha Atha Bhajana Kriya Tato Anartha Nivriti. So the whole that should give the inspiration to follow the process by which we come to the level or the development of, or the rediscovery of Krishna Prema. The consciousness has to be purified. So bathing in Radha Kund, hearing Chaitanya Leela, that will purify us, especially if we have the proper understanding of what we're doing. Otherwise, many people may hear Chaitanya Leela, not have the proper understanding. They may be envious of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and they come up with all conclusions. Who is that we were just discussing? Who is that said that? Oh, I speak of how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Anyway, I don't want to talk about that. It's so envious. Ugh, these nasty scholars. The things they invent things about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu which are just so envious. Have no basis just in their imagination. Just because they read Chaitanya Charitamrita and their envy increases. They want to deny, this can't be true. It must be, he must have had some mental disease, or just so nasty, envious people. So we have to hear from devotees and understand Bhakti Siddhanta. As Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, Bhakti Siddhanta, Viruddha, Arasebas, Shunile Prabhuchite, Nahoyulas. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he didn't like to hear things which were against the proper understanding and teachings of Bhakti and Rasa. We want to talk about all Leelas, but then we won't, if we don't understand properly, then we'll make a big mix-up. So that should, that Krishna Prema, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to give Krishna Prema. Krishna Prema Prada, we prayed to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as Krishna Prema Prada, the one who comes to give Krishna Prema. But how does he give it? This Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Jibe Daya Kari Shaparshoda Shiyadhama Shaha Avatari. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, being very merciful to the fallen souls, descends into the world, into this world, along with his associates and with his holy dham of Navadvip. For what purpose? Atantar dulabha prema karibarita. For the purpose of giving that extremely rare Krishna prema. This is why he comes. And how does he give it? Shikai Sharanagati Bhakatera. He teaches the process of Sharanagati, of how we take shelter of Krishna. Anukulyasya sankalpa pratikulyasya varjanam rakshishati vishvasa guptritve varanam tata atma nikshepa karpanye sharvidha sharanagati. Learning what is conducive for advancement in devotional service and accepting it. We have to. How will we know? How will we do what's conducive for advancement in devotional service if we don't know? And how will we know what's conducive unless we understand what Krishna consciousness is? We need to understand. And how are we going to understand what to give up? We have to give up that which is not conducive for advancement in devotional service. Then faith, Krishna will protect us, Krishna will maintain us. And the spirit of just completely giving ourselves to Krishna. And karpanya, the feeling of wretchedness. Dainya, the feeling of being very fallen. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu teaches this. Teaches. Krishna Prema is inherent in everyone, dormant in everyone. But still we need to know the process to follow to awaken that dormant love of Krishna. So hearing about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes, visiting the holy places, that is purifying in itself, and it gives inspiration, should give inspiration to follow everything else that is needed so that one can advance more and more and more in Krishna consciousness. It's not a substitute for going to Vrindavan or hearing pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It's not a substitute for applying ourselves seriously in devotional service. Rather, it should be an impetus for us to do so, that we want to join the pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So we have to become eligible for doing so. How do we become eligible? We follow the process that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave us. He wanted to bring us to Him, but then we have to become qualified for that. And He taught us how to do that. And of course, for one who is already fully purified, when they hear the pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, it's not just an inspiration, but it becomes their very life. And this whole point of following strictly for, I don't know, it's following strictly for. But for one who is actually absorbed in that, then automatically they don't have to think, should I do this, should I do that? They automatically act in a way which is pleasing to Krishna. Hare Krishna. So that's it. Time for Gaur Arati. Alright, so we finish that. Shri Shri Gauranitai ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.